Hey folks, I'm Chris Thornton, this is Not School, and today I want to talk about Pokémon Go, particularly how you can get a hold of it if you're not in the US. If your social media feed over the past weekend has been anything like mine, you've probably seen dozens and dozens of stories about Pokémon Go just over the past few days since it launched. America has gone completely crazy for it, like go exploring in the woods and discover a dead body crazy, or stop your car in the middle of a busy highway to try and catch a Pikachu crazy. And so of course I thought to myself, that sounds like fun. I want to stop my car in the middle of a busy road to try and catch a Pikachu. How do I get a hold of this app? It turns out that you can't actually download it from the Play Store for Android or from iTunes here in the UK. Niantic, the developers, are steadily releasing it. They're doing a staggered release where they're doing a few countries at a time. So places like Australia and Japan were first, then they released it in the US. It's not yet released here in the UK. And given the huge amount of demand that there's been and the way that it's completely overloaded their servers, it's probably not going to be coming out in the UK for a little while yet until they can get used to all that massive demand, which is a shame because everyone online keeps going on about it. I wanted to have a go at it, and so I looked into it a little bit more and found out that actually you can get a hold of this game. And it's relatively easy. For people who are using iOS, it basically amounts to changing your settings to pretend that your phone or your tablet is in the US. Or if you're on Android, you can download the Android application pack, that is the APK file. You can download the file itself from a separate site and then install that on your phone. It's known as sideloading. And I'm going to leave links to how to do both of these down in the description. There's a little bit of a problem, by the way, with Android, which is that there are two versions of the APK file going around, and one of them is completely fine and legitimate. It's the one that you'd get from the Play Store. The other one is being used as a Trojan. There's all sorts of unpleasant stuff in there. In particular, there's something which will try and run up a big phone bill or try and send text messages. So I'm going to leave a link to the file which I've used, which, as far as I can tell, is the correct one. But when you install these files, and in fact this is true for anything, it's a good idea when you install things to check what permissions you're giving it. In particular, this is a game which shouldn't need to be able to make phone calls and it shouldn't need to be able to send text messages. If you're downloading a file which says it can do that, stop, because you've got the wrong one. Again, I'll leave a link to the one which I've used down in the description so that you can get the same thing as me. But do check those permissions. I suppose it's possible that someone could end up changing that file and it could end up being the wrong one. So check your permissions carefully. So what's the game like? Well, if any of you ever played the developer Niantic's previous game, Ingress, you'll find that it's pretty similar. What's really interesting is that in Ingress, you had to visit different locations to perform different actions, and you could actually suggest locations to Niantic, and then they would integrate those into the game after a little while. I actually suggested a couple myself. Those locations have all been copied straight across into Pokémon Go. And so you're visiting all the same places. The entire database is exactly the same, even including the pictures of the locations. And so you'll be going to visit those same locations. This is why some of them are in slightly stupid locations, because seeing as it was up to the players to suggest them, some of the players have suggested really stupid ones. I did hear of one in America, which is in the middle of a river where during the summer season, it's fine and you can walk out to it and it's no problem. But in autumn and winter, then the river will be in flood and you can't actually get to that location. So you'll be walking around to these different locations, and on the way you'll stumble across different Pokemon. Your phone will vibrate and you'll get a little alert, and you can try and catch them by throwing a Pokeball at them. It doesn't explain how to do this effectively. When you press and hold down on the Pokeball, a circle will appear around the Pokemon, and it will steadily start to shrink. You need to try and flick that Pokeball towards the Pokemon when the circle's at its smallest. Once it's got really small, it will get big again and start over. So you can wait until it gets to the right point. That tends to be the most effective way to do it. Wait until the circle's got to its smallest. Different Pokemon have different levels of difficulty when it comes to catching them. So some of them just kind of stand there, whereas something like Zubat moves from side to side, and it's really tricky to catch. Don't worry if you waste a few Pokeballs though, because you'll find lots more. As you walk around, you'll find these different locations, they're called Pokéstops, and you can pick up more Pokeballs there. You'll spin a little thing, there'll be a picture of the location, and you'll spin it around, and then it will give up 3 or 4 Pokeballs. It might give up some potions, which you can use for healing. It might also give out eggs. Now these eggs can then be put in an incubator, and as you walk around it steadily incubates them until the egg hatches into a new Pokemon. A few of the locations are a bit different, they're gyms, and these are places where either you can train your Pokemon or you can get them to battle other Pokemon. The process is pretty much the same. When you get to level 5, and I've had the game about a day now and I'm already at level 7, so it's pretty quick to get to level 5. When you get to level 5, you then choose a team. It's basically red, yellow or blue. I went for the blue team. That seemed to be all focused on trying to get your Pokemon to evolve. That doesn't really seem to have played any sort of role whatsoever in the gameplay yet, but I assume it's something which will crop up a bit more in future. So if I go to a blue gym, I can then train my Pokemon, I can get them to fight the Pokemon which is at the gym there, and they get a bit stronger. I assume I've been hugely unsuccessful with this so far, and I'll explain why in a minute. Or if I go to a different coloured gym, then I can attack that, I can try and weaken that gym, and possibly take that gym over, or at the very least lower their prestige. The trouble is, and this is one of the problems with the game, it doesn't explain how to actually do these fights. It says, and there's a very brief explanation, it says swipe left and right, it doesn't say anything else. Which is why I was hugely unsuccessful with the first one of these fights I had. What you've got to do is swipe left and right to dodge, you've also got to tap the screen repeatedly to attack, and you've got to keep trying to swap your Pokemon out with other ones, because you'll get a whole load of Pokemon all collected up. You'll need to keep swapping them back and forth because they'll keep getting steadily worn down on their health, and you'll need to keep putting new ones in the game before you get knocked out. Those Pokemon which do get hurt, you can heal them afterwards. You don't lose them. So don't worry about taking them right to the point where they're almost completely exhausted. But you do need to keep swapping them as well. And this brings on one of the problems with the game, which it really doesn't explain things all that well. There's very brief explanations, but there's an awful lot which is left up to you to figure out. The other key mechanic, which it really should explain a lot better than it does, is when it comes to candy and Stardust. It sounds a bit stupid, I know, but what you need to know is quite simple. You get Stardust every time you catch a Pokemon. You get 100 units of Stardust. The Stardust is really important when it comes to powering up the Pokemon. That is, taking a relatively low powered Pokemon and without evolving it, making it more powerful, giving it more health points and giving it more attack points. You can then use candy to evolve the Pokemon, and different types of Pokemon need different amounts of candy. So for example, a Pidgey is a pretty common Pokemon. I've found quite a few of them. They only take 12 pieces of candy to evolve into a Pidgeotto. Whereas a Magikarp, although I've found quite a few of those as well, and they are completely useless, it's a fish lying on its side, flapping and gasping for air. Useless. But if you manage to get 400 pieces of candy, then you can evolve them as well. I assume it evolves into something worth it, because as it is, it's a total waste of time. But that isn't explained anywhere. You can get more candy and you can get more Stardust by catching more Pokemon. If you've caught extra Pokemon of a particular type, then you can also transfer them. You basically give them back to Professor Willow, who sets up the whole game and introduces everything, and has some weird shoes. Look at the shoes. Those are weird shoes. You can send your Pokemon back to him, you can transfer them to him, and he turns them into candy. It isn't explained how he turns these living creatures into candy. It's a bit worrying, but I'm not going to think too hard about that. The important thing is, if you get something which you've already got before, go for it, because you can get more Stardust, you can get more candy, and you also increase your XP. For every Pokemon that you catch, you get 100 XP. For every new type of Pokemon that you catch, you also get another 500 XP on top of that. Plus, you can also get additional XP if you do a good throw and catch when you're catching the Pokemon. So none of that is actually explained in the game, but it is worth knowing. So you can actually save up the Stardust as well. Save it up and use it on something good. Save it up and use it. Don't just evolve the first thing which you can evolve or power up the first thing which you can power up. Hold on to it, because you don't need any of that until you actually go to a gym and do a battle. So that's the basic mechanics. It's kind of fun, and I can see how it can be addictive and compelling. I mean, that's what the Pokemon series is entirely based on anyway, and at least they're getting you off the couch and walking around outdoors to try and get these Pokemon. So hopefully that'll be good. There are a couple of things which it's worth pointing out as well. Firstly, as you're moving around, pay attention to your surroundings. Don't try and do this on a hoverboard or a bicycle or in a vehicle unless it's someone else driving that vehicle. That would be enormously dangerous. Seriously, that guy who stopped the traffic so that he could get a Pikachu, not smart. Not smart at all. But make sure that you're looking where you're going. It's hard enough to concentrate on this on foot, so trying to control a vehicle at the same time is really not a good idea. Secondly, look at where the locations actually are on the map. There have been some reports of some of these locations showing up in really sketchy areas where people shouldn't be going. I did also hear one report where it said that some people had set up one of these locations specifically to go and try and catch people and mug them when they were going to the gym. Load of rubbish, that story. I imagine there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere. There's a little bit of truth in that I suppose if you knew a lot of people were going to be going to a particular place with their phones, then it would be a good place if you were a criminal to go hang out late at night and try and mug them. But no criminals have set up one of these locations because you can't set up the locations. Even if you wanted to, you'd have to go back into Ingress to do that, and then you'd have to submit it, and then you'd have to wait. When I set up my first Ingress portal, it took over a month for it to be approved. So the game hasn't been out long enough for that to have happened. That's just a scare story. But look at where the locations are on a map. Don't go to the worst neighbourhood in your town or city and be wandering around with your phone out in the middle of the night. That is not a smart thing to do. Actually, going around in the middle of the night probably isn't a smart thing to do anyway, because at least from my own experience so far over the past 24 hours, late at night seems to be when the servers are busiest, because I guess that's when America's woken up and they're all trying to catch Pokemon as well. So here in the UK, you're probably going to find it works best throughout the morning and the afternoon, maybe even the evening, but as it gets later on, you're probably going to find it's difficult to connect to those servers, at least for the time being. The software does seem to be a little bit flaky as well. It doesn't always work exactly as it should do. For example, the GPS on my phone, when I use something like Google Maps, it finds my location straight away. Now, if you don't know, the way that the GPS in something like a phone works is you've got a whole chipset which is figuring out your location, and then it passes that on to other phone systems. So it's basically passing your latitude and longitude to different phone systems, like Google Maps. And then Google Maps places your location on the map from that. Anything which uses your location works in the same way. It's taking a location which has been found by a completely separate part of the phone and just placing that in its own software. So I don't understand why it is within Pokemon Go, why it is that my location is often 10, 15 meters away from where I actually am. It's weird. Now, granted, my phone isn't always the best. It's an LG G4C, and I wouldn't recommend anyone buy one. I've not been particularly impressed with it. But even so, I don't understand why some software can get my location spot on straight away, and this software doesn't manage it. It's a mystery to me. It also can't seem to figure out which way up I'm holding my screen. There are problems with the orientation. Now, I've tried it on other phones as well, and it doesn't seem to be the same on all phones, so you may get different mileage with your phone. Hopefully you will. Speaking of mileage, it is a battery killer as well. For you to be doing this, it does not work with the screen off. It will sort of figure out if you've walked some distance while the screen's off, but it will not send push alerts to let you know when you're near to Pokemon unless the app is on and running and the screen is lit up. Now your screen is probably the biggest drain on your battery, followed by things like Wi-Fi for course location, GPS for find location. All of these things will run your battery down. My phone actually, one of its good features, one of the few good features about it, is that it has a pretty long battery life. But even for me, on a 2-hour walk, even running it in battery saving mode and with the screen brightness turned down, it still only lasted for about 2 hours. So if you're going to be doing this much, you're probably going to need a battery pack. Otherwise, you're going to find that your phone runs out of juice way before you've actually finished doing anything. This is going to be particularly important if you're also using your phone to find your way around. Of course, you may be going to places you haven't been before as part of the game. You're going to need that map on your phone, unless you've got a paper map with you. You're going to need that map on your phone, so make sure that you've got an extra battery pack. That is probably going to be a really important bit about this. Also, oddly, for a multiplayer game, you don't really see anything of any of the other players, except for when you get to a gym and you can see who it is who's managed to take control of that gym. But that's about it. Even Ingress had a local messaging system which you could use to communicate with all different players in your area or just the players on your team. I'm surprised there isn't something like this in the game, especially given that there is a whole team focus to it. I assume that's going to be something which comes along with a future update once they've managed to put out the server fire which they're having as thousands of people all try to connect at the same time. That does seem like an oversight. There are other things which seem a little bit odd about it as well. Like, I'm not sure what the point of being on a team is. I don't know why they've asked us to pick a team. That doesn't seem clear. I also don't understand what the end point of any of this is. Where's it going? There doesn't really seem to be any sort of story. And for a game series which has so many years, decades even, of story behind it, it seems odd that there's basically no story at all here. Again, in Ingress, there definitely was a story, and so I imagine that this is something which is going to come on stream once they've worked out all these launch bugs. So those are my thoughts having played the game for a day. I assume at some point in the future I'm going to do a follow-up video when I've had more time to play it and more time to get used to it. Let me know what you think down in the comments. You could also like and subscribe if you found this video useful, and will someone also please leave me some comments telling me where I can find out which are the good Pokemon and which aren't. Because this is the first Pokemon game I've ever played, I have no idea which are the good ones. I am absolutely certain though, Magikarp is not one of the good ones. Because it's a dying fish. You're terrible, Magikarp. Okay, thanks very much for watching.